said uranium cannot be mined without workers, it cannot be transported without them, and the mines cannot be supplied without them. I think some people still, to this day really, are persuaded to think that workers won't use our power in defense of the environment because workers have different sets of interests somehow from environmental campaigners. But Jack Mundey put it like this. He said, "What is the use of higher wages alone if we have to live in cities devoid of parks, denuded of trees, in an atmosphere poisoned by pollution and vibrating with the noise of hundreds of thousands of units of private transport?" Now, it's also true, of course, that the Green Ban movement was a pinnacle, really, at the time in the fight by organised workers to save both the built and the living environment. But it's by no means the only time working class people have used our power to fight environmental causes. I'm going to start here with some long-standing campaigns. And if we've got time, we'll look at some other examples. So staying in Australia in the years following the Green Ban, as I already hinted, workers were involved in a movement against uranium mining in the late 1970s. Really, this was a mass movement that swept Australia. In fact, an international movement, but I'll just focus on the Australian end. Workers refused to supply mines with construction material, with shipping, with power, communications. The Transport Workers Union refused to move mining goods. Really grassroots involvement in trying to end this trade. It's got to be said that it was often left to local organisations to implement national policy against uranium, and that sometimes the local workers had to act against national trade union decisions, the trade union leadership often being strong on words and short on action. And some of those local heroes, I'll give you one example, a railway worker, Jim Assenbrook, who refused to transport material heading for a Queensland uranium mine. Of course, he was sacked. But the Australian Railways Union went on the world's first anti-nuclear strike in his defence, and within a day he'd been reinstated. And the port workers were also significant pools of resistance. For example, a quote from an article by a woman called Sandra Bloodworth. She said that in Sydney in 1977, truckloads of yellowcake were known to be careening down city streets in the middle of the night, sometimes going in the wrong direction down one-way streets escorted by the police. So in late June, demonstrators invaded Sydney docks and the rank and file wharfies stopped work because they also wanted to stop the ore from leaving the port. And this action was repeated in Melbourne. After police violence against protesters, I think was a final straw for them, the port workers refused to touch any more uranium, and that became a blanket ban. Then the authorities didn't try to ship uranium from Melbourne docks after that. And just to show the potential power that workers have here, the action by workers cut profits by 2/3 at the Mary Kathleen mine, that's a uranium mine, between 1980 and 1981. And they forced the rank and file action forced the Australian Labor Party to come out against uranium, although it must also be said that the position was always a bit ambivalent. This didn't succeed in banning the uranium trade, but it did delay development. And I think given the fact that Australia is burning again and the centrality of Australia to the climate struggle, I really take heart from the fact that the workers' involvement both in the Green Ban and the anti-uranium movement is really in the memory of the working class. People talk about it today with real wistfulness. But we shouldn't either think that Australia is the only case. In Brazil, a case where a very, very different, another long-standing campaign, but a very different context in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. Very unusual because they've managed to unionize isolated rubber workers living on these isolated homesteads, rubber estates, who usually several hours walk from each other. And this is a struggle I think that's well known, because most people will have heard of Chico Mendes. They'll know him as an environmentalist, but in fact, he was a radical rubber workers union leader who helped internationalize the struggle to defend the Amazon against burning. This is obviously poignant at the moment, I think, given that burning of the Amazon is at a 20-year high under Bolsonaro. And this was a horrendous situation again back then. During the military dictatorship, gunmen were being paid to clear land by the acre for cattle ranching. These rubber workers couldn't go on strike because their labour wasn't wanted anymore. They were actually wanted off the land. So they had to engage in what they called empates. It was a kind of direct action where they would surround a protest camp and they would appeal for solidarity from the clearance workers while at the same time dismantling their camp. And usually that solidarity would be forthcoming. Part two, of course, is that the cops are then brought in to make sure that it happens, and with the, all of the ensuing violence that brought. Nonetheless, of the 45 empates that Chico Mendes was involved in, 15 of them were successful. And he and his fellow trade unionists managed to create solidarity networks with other trade unions, limited success actually, but really successful network with indigenous people who, they ended up going to the government together, made international links, and came up with the idea of the extractivist reserve based on the Amazon as a sustainable place of work and a sustainable place of production. Chico Mendes, as people may know, was murdered in 1988. He was considered that much of a threat. And they didn't stop the march of capitalist development in the Amazon, but they did help put that struggle firmly on the map. And other shorter campaigns have also been significant, highly significant in their impact. Their workers were pivotal to the campaign to end nuclear dumping at sea. In 1983, British workers forced the Tory government to accept an international moratorium on dumping, which they've been planning to ignore. Actually, they've been planning to dump more waste. And I think this is an interesting case for several reasons, not least because there was a reversal of trade union policy. In 1979, that's the year, of course, that Thatcher came in, the trade union Congress was more gung-ho on nuclear than the Conservative government was. That all changed when they learned from leaked cabinet minutes that Thatcher was planning to use nuclear to undermine coal workers and the workers who transported that coal. So there's the kind of reversal in feeling. And in March 1983, the National Union of Seamen became instrumental to the campaign to make that moratorium hold. They were joined by the the Transport and General Workers Union, the National Union of Railwaymen, and the other train drivers union, ASLEF, who agreed to boycott the movement of nuclear waste to port. And fascinatingly, I wish I'd seen this, they had an armada ready, apparently, in case they brought the Navy in. They were going to set this armada off to enforce the ban. The government was so frightened that they backed down and changed policy. Now, I've forgotten to show you the pictures here of uranium mining in Australia, Chico Mendes cutting his rubber outside the union offices, and here all linking arms, ready to engage in one of their empates. And here is Greenpeace, a picture of Greenpeace actually trying to do it without the trade unions and being practically drowned by the dump boats. We also had in the in London, one of the only because 500 workers left site. They refused to work with asbestos, said we ain't coming back until you get this stuff off site. It took a fortnight to achieve that. And in the meantime, this is not just a health and safety issue, they're actually engaging in the campaign to ban asbestos altogether. That we didn't achieve until 1999, ridiculously, but they achieved their immediate aims within a fortnight. And I like the quote from Alfred, the shop steward: our strike is to get the dust out. It's not just about the building of the centre, but it's about the people who will move in as well. And there's a fairly long gap then, really, particularly in Britain anyway, I think neoliberalism having taken its toll on our confidence, until two occupations in 2009 at Vistion in North London and Vestas on the Isle of Wight. And Vestas is the one that is most remembered from an environmental point of view, because they were urged by socialists and trade unionists to put the green jobs fight at the heart of that campaign, and to gain all of the solidarity and the headlines that would come with that. They didn't manage to save their jobs, but they did make the campaign for climate jobs concrete. And I think it's worth quoting socialist Jonathan Neal, who some people will know, who said, the campaign against climate change and various trade unions have been working on a plan for 1 million green jobs. That was a plan. After Vestas, we can imagine making it happen. And so just to come right up to date, obviously we've got last year's climate strike. This was the first climate strike in which the students had asked workers to strike alongside them and for adults to become involved as well. And I think was a real high point in attempts to bring economic and environmental issues together. We probably know the figures, 7 million strikers worldwide. It ranks alongside the Iraq War as the biggest global protest ever. And in Britain, there was significant trade union involvement, largely because we were able to get the TUC to back 40 minutes of workplace action. 30 minutes, actually, I think I've exaggerated that. And militants used that to get their colleagues out on the street, to get them to go to march down to rallies, particularly at councils that had declared a climate emergency. And we even had one instance here, I've put a photograph of SOAS up here for you, because the workers at SOAS actually marched out on unofficial walkout. Nobody asked anybody's permission for half a day, purely over the climate strike. Similarly, the PCS, the BAIS PCS branch, they cleaners there marched down to the London rally under that banner, fighting for a green, fair, and I think it says living planet, for a living wage on a living planet, basically, and a very similar story in Australia. So I wanted to give you all of those examples, but I think in themselves, they're vitally important for when we're having discussions with people about what's possible. But they're also important, I think, because we need to talk as well about the lessons from the past, not in the negative, not in what went wrong kind of terms, but what actually needs for workers, what needs to happen for workers to take action to help save the planet as we so desperately do today. That's obviously, it's kind of part of a broader question, really, about how we can make trade unionism political. And I think the Green Ban movement, if it shows anything, is that it's easier to argue for political trade unionism when workers' confidence is high. The rise and fall of that movement really follows unemployment figures in the sector, tracks it really, really very closely. But it's not just about objective conditions, it's about what you do with those objective conditions. And in the Builders Labourers Federation, they spent the 60s, as I'd said, fighting off these corrupt right wing of the union. They democratised the union. They had a really high participation in meetings and ballots. And they waged really militant battles for decent site conditions and to close the pay gap with traditional building trades. When I say militant, I mean they were electing their own foreman, they were working in members that the bosses didn't want, including women they wanted on the job, occupying the boss's office, destroying stuff that had been built with scab labour. I mean, really, really tremendously exciting times. And they'd had huge strikes in 1970 and 71 and really won greatly improved pay and conditions. I think that's really explains the confidence that the rank and file workers had to take on these political issues in the 1970s, not just the Green Ban, but Aboriginal land rights, women's rights, gay rights, anti-apartheid movement, the Vietnam War, and so on. But many of the other examples I've given don't come in times of buoyancy. You could say that occupation, finance, press work, paying 3 million. And it's also true, I think, that all of the examples of struggle I've found, there's a social movement for them to tap into. Clearly, the great example of the Green Band movement, that was true. They learned a lot of their tactics and took their interest from those really, tremendously rebellious street movements in that heady period of the late 60s and early. It's true, I think, in every one of the examples that I've given you. And even with that backdrop, workers don't automatically engage in political struggle as workers, especially since the leadership of the trade union movement is normally trying to pull it back to a discussion about bread and butter issues, and we should leave the politics to somebody else. So the other things that we need is a network of militant socialists, often revolutionaries, who are countering that division and making the links between issues, using whatever openings are available to bring them together. Gramsci called this the conscious leadership of the class. And he said where you couldn't see them, it was likely simply that these people had left no record. Well, I'm just going to give you a record of some of those people on your screen in front of you. These are just people I managed to find photographs of, actually, who are great campaigners environmentally from a working class standpoint, usually trade unionists, and also revolutionaries and socialists. These people are not always in a position of power, but they are always politicizing the struggle, always making the links between issues and pushing that struggle as far as it will go. So just to bring this discussion back to a close, this man in your bottom right, Sandy Nicol, I interviewed him for this article that I'd written, and I asked him the straight question. I said, do you need to be a member of a revolutionary party, Sandy, to organise effective workers' action for the climate? And this is what he said. He said, you don't need to be a revolutionary socialist, Kim, no, to want to take action on the climate or to be a good trade unionist, but the connections you make between those things do matter. Revolutionary politics mean you readily make those connections in your own head, and they enable you to build organisationally in a way that effectively combines them. It affects how you organise, and being part of a network of revolutionaries gives you the confidence to do it. And this is my final point. None of the environmental gains we make are permanent under capitalism, because capitalists can't help but degrade the environment in that relentless pursuit for profit. So we need system change. Probably everybody in this meeting would agree that we need that. And workers are central to that system change. And if you agree with that, and if you're not already a member, please consider joining us and becoming part of that network of revolutionaries. Yeah, we are being really centrally involved in the anti-fracking movement in Scarborough, and I share all of the frustrations that comrades have with trying to get people to understand the need to organise workers. I think you kind of just keep having to have that argument and take whatever situation is thrown at you. And just give you an example. We had a situation at our local fracking well where the police asked the fire brigade to come in and to actually help them arrest somebody who was up a tower. And unfortunately, it was the most conservative watch that happened to be on at that particular time. And they just did as they were asked, and they brought this guy down, which really cemented this kind of anti-worker feeling among the more kind of anarchist elements of that fracking camp. And we had to, we were in this sort of position where we had to think about what the heck, how are we going to solve this one? And so we got in touch with the fire brigades union, with the chair of the local fire brigades union, and we talked him through putting out a statement to say that that their job was not to help the police, that they had a duty of care, and and so on and so forth, and that they were not happy with the situation. It was disgraceful. Their members had been put in that position, and and so they put out this statement, which we actually got printed in Socialist Worker, and really did a lot to kind of alleviate the mood on the camp, to the point where when there were, and the next round of cuts was going through in the fire brigade, the local fire brigade, it was like out in the middle of nowhere is the kind of brigade headquarters, and all of these campers from the anti-fracking camp all turned up, muddy booted from the camp, you know, wrapped in blankets, turning up to be in the public gallery to show their support for the fire brigade who'd shown them. So somebody's kind of got to be in the middle and to be that cog, I think, and it's us, you know, whether we're organising a joint public meeting or get campaign against climate change, to put out a leaflet for workers. We did that in the anti-fracking movement as well, which went down really well. Get workers to act, trade unionists to actually come into the XR meeting and to have that discussion, not just us, but the people that we work with, to kind of have that discussion with them. It's not surprising, you know, I mean, the division of the political and the bread and butter trade union issues is felt really, really keenly, I think, in environmental issues. Now, I was also really interested in what you were saying about Chico Mendes. You know, he's not discussed as a revolutionary, and in fact, actually, the guy Tavores, I can't remember his first name, the old revolutionary who he learned from, who was hiding out in the forest. What he said to him was, "Don't." This is the Lenin connection. He said, union just because it's a yellow union in there, and I should and I think it's right as well to talk about, you know, the fact that the climate issue has not gone away. It feels difficult, everything feels kind of difficult at the moment, but there are so many angles that this is going to come at. Sometimes it's a sort of seems like a purely ideological situation, like, you know, maybe with the green ban movement or with the nuclear dumping issue. But sometimes we come at this stuff from health and as well. And I don't know if the last year where they had to stand workers down, the union stood working in those. You can kind of us have to make those demands, health and safety, so climate demands that then spill over, you know, and so forth. I think in a way it'll become a really easy argument to have, because we are on the right but be on the back foot to an extent. Just realised you're recording me.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah. So it's interesting that there's actually a debate in the branch. That's great. I can't remember the last time that there was a debate about strategy in my own branch meeting. Actually, that's that is brilliant. I think it's right to say that, you know, that we don't like wait for the right conditions. Vestas didn't happen in the right conditions, did it? It was, you know, really after the financial crash, in that mini clear out of capital after the financial crash. And I think to a large extent it was socialists and trade unionists that made that climate related fight back on the part of the Vestas workers happen. I don't think without that network, I really don't think that struggle would have happened at all. And I'm not surprised that the working class is not seen as central, though, because you know, apart from these little breakouts, and we've been feeling this really, I think, since the 90s, haven't we? That, you know, that it's really, the strikes are at a really low level, working class confidence is really low, but you get these little breakouts, and you use whatever breakout you get. But it's not surprising that has not, that period when working class activity is, relatively speaking, very, very low, has not managed to make the climate movement, the environmental movement, feel like the working class is a solution. And so I just think we have to be the linchpins in that. Yeah, it's right, the comrade, I'm sorry I don't know anybody's name, I'm not very good with names. I think it's right to say that what we've got to offer is political, and is a political argument. We have to put those political arguments, we do. But I've also sort of learned that in order to make that political argument, you have to put on a stupid costume sometimes, and you have to bake a cake and go and sell the cake on a stall on the high street. And, you know, and all these things, all these democratic decisions that are made in your XR group, you know, you kind of grin and bear it and you think this is not what I do, but, you know, you kind of do it and you earn your stripes, actually. You earn the right to sell your newspaper, to put your socialist argument, to invite people to, you know, to come and speak and so on. Yeah, just to come back on the specific question about the role of Tony Benn in the Lucas plan. I didn't mention the Lucas plan because it would have been taking up too much of the talk, I think, with something that, although it was very radical in its content, a complete reimagining of the form and content of production in what sounded like a lovely, you know, sort of socialist way, actually didn't have what was necessary in terms of ownership or struggle to make it happen. So it ends up being this kind of nice plan that we put, and surprise, surprise, it ends up being rejected. And it was actually Tony Benn that suggested it in the first place. So the Joint Combines Shop Steward Committee went to see Tony Benn, and what they actually were asking for was nationalisation of the industry. That was the request. And what came back was, why don't you put together this plan? And that was actually where the idea of the plan was born. But of course, Tony Benn had his, shall we say, his own problems in the Labour Party, and actually the majority of the Labour Party machine found the Lucas plan embarrassing, and although lip service was paid to it, although conference motions were passed, actually they really could not find a minister who would actually say, yes, let's take this, let's run with it, despite all of the promises about workers' control, and let's make it happen. So was there anything else? Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to say really is that I sort of feel bad mentioning Frack Free Scarborough all the time. Every party bloody thing I go to, I mention Frack Free Scarborough, but it's the main campaign that we've been involved with here, and we'd sort of managed to get that campaign to the point where if there's a set of workers in struggle, we find the environmental link, the climate link, and we put the argument that Frack Free Scarborough should do a collection, put their hands in their pockets, send a letter of solidarity. So when, you know, the Optair, I think Wendy's been doing a lot of the coordinating for the Optair thing, and we were able to get like 2 or 3, I think, campaigns in Scarborough added to the, you know, added to Wendy's list. So I don't want to be moralistic about it, because I don't think it's a moral argument. It's actually about where is the great front of struggle, and there can be from COVID, which Deb was just talking about, to wildfires, to floods. There can be no question that actually the climate is, you know, is going to be one of the main planes of struggle, I think, in the future.
Fantastic, Kim.